If you've ever spent a night alone in the wilderness, you'll know there comes a point when silence stops feeling peaceful. It begins to feel like something listening. The old fire lookout towers scattered across Blackwood National Forest were built decades before satellites and drones. Perched high above the endless pine canopy, they once served as the first line of defense against wildfires. Most had been abandoned years ago, left to rot beneath snow and rain. Only one remained staffed year-round. Tower 14. Locals avoided it. Not because it was haunted, because every ranger assigned there eventually requested a transfer. None of them ever gave the same reason. When I accepted the winter assignment, I assumed the stories were nothing more than campfire folklore. My name is Daniel Carter. I'd spent 12 years working as a park ranger, and solitude had never bothered me. If anything, I preferred it. A month alone in a fire tower overlooking hundreds of square miles of untouched forest sounded less like punishment and more like a vacation. The nearest town sat nearly 40 miles away. Cell service barely existed. The only reliable communication came through an aging emergency radio connected to the ranger station. My predecessor, an older ranger named Ellis Monroe, greeted me with a tired smile as I climbed the final staircase. "You've never worked Tower 14 before." I shook my head. "It's quiet." He paused. "Too quiet." Inside, the lookout was exactly as I'd imagined. A single room surrounded by windows, a narrow bed, a small wood stove, a weathered desk covered in maps, shelves stacked with emergency supplies, and in the center, an old analog radio. Its green indicator light glowed steadily despite looking at least 40 years old. Ellis rested a hand on it. "If this thing talks after 3 in the morning." He hesitated. "Don't answer." I laughed. "You serious?" He didn't smile. "Promise me." "What happens if I do?" His eyes drifted toward the dark forest stretching beyond the windows. "I don't know." Another pause. "I never found out." The first few days passed uneventfully. My routine quickly settled into place. Each morning I scanned the horizon for smoke, recorded weather conditions, maintained the equipment, read books, watched snow drift through the endless pines. At sunset, the forest transformed. The mountains swallowed what little daylight remained, leaving the trees below as a single black ocean stretching in every direction. The wind rarely stopped. It whispered endlessly through the branches. Some nights it almost sounded like distant conversations. I blamed my imagination. On the 5th night, I woke to static. The radio. It hissed softly across the room. I checked my watch. 3:17 a.m. The speaker crackled. "Tower 14. The voice was faint, distorted. "Mail. Do not answer." The transmission dissolved into static before I could respond. Half asleep, I assumed another ranger had accidentally broadcast on the wrong frequency. By morning, I'd forgotten about it. Until I called the ranger station. "No one transmitted overnight," the dispatcher said. "You sure?" "We log every emergency frequency." There wasn't any traffic. I glanced toward the silent radio. Maybe the old equipment was failing. The following night, 3:17. Static. Again. "Tower 14. Long pause. "Please don't answer tonight." The voice sounded clearer. Older. Calm. I reached for the microphone, then remembered Ellis's warning. Instead, I simply listened. Nothing. After several seconds, the transmission ended. Snow arrived early that week. By Friday, Tower 14 stood isolated above a white wilderness. Roads disappeared beneath drifting snow. Supply deliveries were postponed. For the first time, I was truly alone. Or so I believed. That evening, while checking binocular markers around sunset, I noticed movement far below. Someone was walking through the trees. At first I assumed another ranger, but no vehicles had arrived. The figure moved slowly between the pines, too far away to distinguish details. It stopped, looked directly toward the tower, then disappeared behind the trees. I contacted the ranger station immediately. No one should be out there. The dispatcher sounded confused. Stay inside until morning. What if they're injured? There aren't any hiking trails within 20 miles. So who was it? Silence. Finally, if you see anyone after dark, don't go looking. The radio clicked off. Sleep came slowly. Every creak of the tower sounded louder than usual. Every gust of wind seemed to circle the lookout. Just after 3, the radio activated again. Static filled the room. Then, Daniel. I froze. The voice had spoken my name. Don't answer. Cold spread across my chest. No one outside the ranger station should have known who was assigned to Tower 14. Certainly not over an unsecured analog frequency. I leaned closer. Who's there? Instantly, the static stopped. The silence that followed felt impossibly heavy. Then another voice answered. Not the first one. This one sounded younger. Closer. Almost whispering. You weren't supposed to do that. The transmission ended. I barely slept. At sunrise, I searched every frequency. Nothing. No unusual broadcasts. No interference. No explanation. Trying to clear my head, I climbed down from the tower and followed the narrow maintenance trail circling the hilltop. Fresh snow covered everything, except one line of footprints. They emerged from the forest, circled the tower once, then returned to the trees. Whoever had made them hadn't approached the stairs. They had simply walked around the lookout, watching it, watching me. I reported the tracks. 2 rangers arrived that afternoon by snowmobile. Together we followed the footprints nearly half a mile into the forest. Then, they stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The final footprint ended in untouched snow. There were no tracks leading away. One ranger quietly removed his hat. We're done. What do you mean? We're going back. But someone made these. He looked toward the trees. No. His expression told me he genuinely believed it. That evening, Ellis called the tower for the first time since leaving. His voice sounded exhausted. You answered, didn't you? I hesitated. Yes. He closed his eyes. I could hear it in his breathing. I hoped maybe. He never finished the sentence. Hoped what? That this time, it would choose someone who listened. The line went dead. The storm hit shortly after midnight. Snow battered every window. The tower groaned beneath powerful winds. Visibility vanished completely. Exactly at 3:17 a.m., the radio came alive. Not with static. With breathing. Slow. Steady. As though someone stood inches from the microphone. Then, Daniel. The voice sounded identical to mine. Look outside. I knew I shouldn't. Every instinct screamed not to move. But curiosity won. I stepped toward the eastern window. Far below, standing perfectly still in the clearing beneath Tower 14, was a man. He wore my winter jacket, my ranger hat, my backpack. Even from that distance, I knew exactly who I was looking at. He slowly raised one hand and waved. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The figure remained perfectly still beneath the tower, one gloved hand raised in an almost friendly wave. Then, just as slowly, it lowered its arm and stepped backward into the trees. I grabbed my binoculars. The clearing was empty. Only untouched snow remained. No footprints. Nothing. The radio hissed once before falling silent. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. The storm had buried the forest beneath nearly 2 feet of fresh snow. I told myself I'd imagined the figure. Exhaustion. Isolation. Sleep deprivation. Every ranger stationed alone long enough experienced strange thoughts. Mine had simply arrived sooner than expected. Still, I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. I climbed down from the tower carrying my camera and followed the trail toward the clearing. The snow was pristine. No tracks. No disturbed branches. No evidence anyone had ever stood there. Until I reached the center of the clearing. Someone had drawn a perfect circle in the snow. Not with footprints. With a finger. The line was impossibly smooth, nearly 20 feet across. Inside the circle, someone had written 3 words. Stay until dawn. I photographed it immediately. By the time I climbed back to the tower, thick snow had already begun falling again. When I reviewed the pictures, the writing wasn't there. Only untouched snow. Every photograph showed an empty clearing. I checked the camera's memory card. The timestamps were correct. The images simply didn't match what I'd seen. That afternoon, I searched the old maintenance logs stored beneath the desk. Most were routine reports. Broken antennas, lightning damage, equipment inspections. Then I found a weathered notebook with no official markings. Its pages were filled with handwritten entries from different ranges dating back almost 50 years. Most consisted of only a single sentence. The radio knew my name. Something walks below after midnight. Never answer at 3:17. One entry stopped me cold. The handwriting belonged to Ellis. I answered on my 7th night. Since then, every morning I wake feeling less certain that I'm the one who came up the mountain. I called Ellis immediately. No answer. Again. Nothing. Finally, the dispatcher answered instead. Ellis retired months ago. I know. I need his number. There was a long silence. I'm sorry. For what? Ellis died 3 years ago. The words didn't register. That's impossible. I spoke to him yesterday. The dispatcher sighed. Mr. Carter, there hasn't been anyone named Ellis Monroe assigned to Tower 14 for over 3 years. The line went dead. That night, I didn't wait for the radio. At 3:10, I unplugged it completely, pulled the power cable, removed the backup battery, set it on the opposite side of the room. At exactly 3:17, the speaker crackled. The green light remained dark. The radio had no power. Yet the voice came through as clearly as if someone stood beside me. Daniel. Static drifted through the room like breathing. You still think this is the radio? A chill spread through my chest. It's not. The voice laughed softly. It never was. The windows shook violently. Not from wind. From knocking. 3 slow taps. On the glass behind me. I turned. Nothing. Another 3 knocks. This time, from a different window. Then another. And another. One by one, every window surrounding the tower echoed with the same slow rhythm. Someone, or something, was walking around the lookout, tapping each pane as it passed. I forced myself not to look outside. The tapping continued for nearly 10 minutes. Then stopped all at once. The silence felt worse. The following morning, the generator failed. Without heat, the temperature inside the tower dropped rapidly. I decided to hike down to the maintenance shed before another storm arrived. The trail wound through dense pine forest where the trees blocked almost all daylight. Halfway down, I heard footsteps behind me. Not close, just close enough to match my pace. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Every time I stopped, they stopped too. I spun around. Nothing but trees. Then I noticed another set of footprints running parallel to mine. They weren't fresh. They had appeared without ever crossing my trail. Whoever made them walked beside me the entire way. Always the same distance away, hidden just beyond the trees. The maintenance shed stood open. Its door swayed gently despite the still air. Inside, shelves had been overturned. Tools scattered across the floor. In the center of the room sat an old reel-to-reel recorder coated in dust. A label attached to it read, Tower 14, Incident Archive. Curiosity overpowered caution. I threaded the tape onto the machine. Pressed play. Static. Then a man's voice. Calm. Professional. This is Ranger Samuel Briggs. February 12, 1981. A pause. I've begun receiving transmissions every night at exactly 3:17. The tape hissed. They sound like me. Another pause. If anyone finds this, don't answer. The recording ended abruptly. Another tape. Another ranger. Different year. Same warning, different voice, same fear. Every recording ended the same way, mid-sentence, as though the speaker had simply vanished. The storm arrived before I could return to the tower. Snow erased the trail within minutes. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The radio clipped to my jacket suddenly crackled. Daniel. Not the emergency channel. The familiar voice. You've stayed long enough. I ran. The forest blurred into white. Branches whipped against my face. Then, through the storm, I saw the tower. Except, there were two of them. Identical. Standing side by side. One with lights glowing warmly inside. The other, completely dark. Both impossible. There had only ever been one. A figure stood in the observation deck of the dark tower. Watching me, it raised a hand. Slowly, patiently, inviting me closer. The radio whispered, "One of us always leaves." I reached the base of the real tower and climbed without looking back. When I burst through the trapdoor, someone was already inside. He stood beside the radio, wearing my face, my clothes, even the scar across my chin. He looked relieved. "There you are." His voice was mine. "I've been waiting." I couldn't speak. He smiled sadly. "I know what you're thinking." He glanced toward the windows. I thought the same thing. "What are you?" He looked genuinely confused. "I was about to ask you." Silence settled between us. Neither of us moved. Then the radio came alive. Not one voice. Hundreds. Layered together. Some crying. Some laughing. Some whispering. All saying the same sentence. "Only one watches the sunrise." The room shook violently. The tower groaned. Outside, the storm intensified. My double stepped toward the door. "I remember coming here." He looked directly into my eyes. "But I don't remember leaving." For the first time, he seemed afraid. Not of me, of what waited outside. The eastern horizon slowly brightened. The first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. The voices on the radio grew quieter. My double turned toward the sunrise. His outline began to blur, like mist dissolving in morning light. He looked back one final time. "I hope." He whispered, "You're the real one." Then, he was gone. Not vanished. Simply, no longer there. Rescue crews reached Tower 14 later that afternoon after the storm cleared. They found me alone, shivering, exhausted. The tower's logbook lay open on the desk. Only one sentence had been written across the final page. Not in my handwriting. Occupant successfully replaced. The investigation found nothing unusual. No second set of footprints. No recorder. No extra tower. No evidence anyone else had ever been there. They closed Tower 14 permanently that spring. The forest slowly reclaimed the trail. The lookout still stands abandoned above Blackwood National Forest. Visitors occasionally report hearing radio static drifting through the trees before dawn. The Park Service blames old equipment, wind, atmospheric interference. Maybe they're right, but every year, just before winter begins, a new name quietly appears on the weathered roster once kept inside the tower. No one knows who writes it. The ink is always fresh. The handwriting never changes. And at the very bottom of the page, beneath every ranger's name, is a final instruction. Do not answer at 3:17 a.m. Thanks for watching. Follow Story Hub Central for more exciting stories.